Right. In the hopes of sticking to a schedule and starting on time, I'll start things off with a little introduction. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jess Loger, and I work with Day Hagel and the Mental Health Wellness First Aid crew. Normally, the director, Day, would be here to run the event and introduce our speakers, but unfortunately, she lives on a remote island on the west coast of BC in Canada here, and they are experiencing a power outage tonight. And she is here, I think, hiding in the group, but unable to participate and chat. So I'll be taking care of the admin or tech issues for everyone from my side. Um, so what is Mental Health Wilderness First Aid? It's an organization that provides mental health first aid training that is specifically oriented for folks who live, work, or play out in remote areas. So we do a lot of work with search and rescue teams, outdoor educators, polar guides, First Nation communities, tree planters, and other remote industries. We have one more course coming up online from November the 25th to the 26th before our director, Day Hagel, goes on maternity leave. We'll be starting up again in the spring of 2024. And we'll also be offering custom courses. So if this training is something you're interested in and have a few folks to join, for sure get in touch and we'll chat about all the different options. In addition to the courses that we offer, we also offer this guest speaker series, which is put on by folks with some background in mental health, speaking on a topic relevant to you all who live, work, and play out in wilderness remote areas. So you can watch our past guest speaker series on the website's events page, and I'll pop that in the chat for everyone to see. And you can check out the website. And I would like to welcome Chris Mushumanski and Greg Miller. A little about them. Chris has been a ground search and rescue volunteer since 1997, based in Vanderhoof, BC, and a CISM peer on the provincial CISM team since 2013. He's also the current president of the British Columbia Search and Rescue Association, representing the GSAR community across BC. When not active with search and rescue, he is a teacher counselor for an online K-12 school. He loves the outdoors, including fly fishing, hunting, and backpacking, and spending time with his wonderful little hound, Pippa. Chris has his master's in counseling and is certified with the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation in individual, group, and advanced CISM interventions. And our other guest speaker, Greg Miller, is the chair of the steering committee for the BC Search and Rescue Association Critical Incident Stress Management Team. He is a part of the core group that built and developed that team and has been working as a critical incident stress responder for over 20 years. He has also been a volunteer with the North Shore Rescue Team for over 40 years. As an active search manager, he has led numerous rescues in the backcountry. Greg has his master's in applied behavioral science and is an organizational development specialist. He is certified with the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation in individual, group, and advanced interventions for CISM. So we're very grateful to Chris and Greg for taking their time to be here tonight. And this is officially the event with the most attendees we've had. We have representatives from the SARA groups from all over the US and Canada, as well as camp directors, polar expedition guides, silviculture supervisors, and many more. So welcome everyone, and well done Chris and Greg for picking such a compelling topic. Right now I'd like to invite all the participants that we have with us to introduce themselves on the Zoom chat, perhaps who you are, where you are, what brought you here. Also, we're recording this event and we will post it to our social media or our webpage and other social outlets If you ask a question or make a public comment and you'd prefer not to be part of that public recording, just let us know by email within the next few days. And then I will be here to support with any tech issues in the background. So please send any support chats my way. You can contact me directly if you need any help, so that Chris and Greg can focus on running the show. And as always, the guest speakers' views are their own and may or may not reflect the views of the Mental Health Wilderness First Aid Group. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Chris and Greg. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I think I sound more impressed by my credentials that got written than who I feel I am. Thank you for that introduction. As mentioned, Chris Mushumanski, a very passionate ground search and rescue member in British Columbia, and also a big advocate for mental health, both in my day job, but also as a volunteer, and a strong believer in the CISM program that we are very fortunate to have in BC. And I'll pass the mic over to Greg.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the evening, and also just to say that it's been amazing to me over the years, sort of where I came across critical incident stress debriefing through a tragedy that happened in our SARA team quite a number of years ago, and it seemed to be very slow in developing, and not a lot of people knew about it, and yet today. So many folks have heard about it. So many people are interested in it, and which is great, because I really do think it's a relatively, how to say, it's relatively a simple approach. It's be no surprise to many of you. It turns out that if we all have a chance to talk to each other, to support each other, to be there for each other, there's a lot better mental health outcomes that come out of that. So that's at its most simple. That's really what critical incident stress interventions are all about.
Cool. Shall we get started, Greg?
Yes. So critical incidents. So a quick little overview. This is like 3 slides, but to make sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone, if you've lived a normal life, have experienced some kind of critical incidents. We are specifically more interested in looking at critical incidents that happen during the work of our search and rescue members. But it's any time a critical incident, something happens that overwhelms your regular mechanisms. It's the kind of thing that your heart pounding and gets you thinking about it, and you can't get it out of your head. But at the same time, all that stuff goes on. It really is just it's your body's normal reaction to this abnormal thing that happened. So what's important to us, if we're going to deal with these kinds of things, is you want to be able to have an intervention, to have a contact with the individual or the group, looking sort of close by the time of the incident. For us, it's within sort of 72 hours, and being able to obviously be in the room is better. Although we learned during COVID that we could even provide interventions over Zoom, and find that they are a good substitute if it's just not possible to get together in person. Okay, next. So would be interesting, because there's, with the number of you, rather than having you come out voice-wise, but just throw into the chat a little bit about what in your work, in your recreation and so on, what are the kind of critical incidents that you know about, or maybe even have actually been present for? Throw a few of those up. And I'll take a look here.
And these might be work related, or they might also be personal, in your own personal life where you had an incident occur.
and I'm going to expect quite a few. So wildfire impacts, first on scene for motor vehicle incidents, fatalities, coming across a car crash. Those are all the kinds of things that, even though some of you are involved in, um, you're leaders of programs, you're leaders of outdoor activities, you these abnormal things, the things like coming across accident scenes or so on, is not really something that we live in our regular normal life day to day. So those kind of major traumatic kinds of things, we are now, in our area, one of the things we're dealing with more is um, dealing with people with mental health issues, dealing with people who are suicidal. Those types of things all can be the kind of trigger, the critical incident trigger that can then be something that we want to pay attention to. Over to you there, Chris.
Thanks, Greg. So again, continuing in the chat, when we recognize that we have been overwhelmed with a stressful event, and thank you for those who added some extra ones there in terms of performing life-saving first aid or dealing with somebody who's drowned in water, many different examples there. Wondering if folks can recognize either in someone else or perhaps in yourself at times what changes you might have had in the 5 different domains that we have listed on there. Sometimes folks recognize physical changes in themselves. Sometimes it might be behavioral, emotional. Many of the critical incidents that folks have a strong emotional component to it. So recognizing that we may have some emotional change, cognitive, changing our thinking, or where we have repetitive thoughts. And one worldview, or perhaps spiritual views, many times you'll hear, for example, somebody saying, why did the universe allow this to happen? Why me? Those sorts of questions. So wondering if anybody recognizes some common symptoms that they see in others or themselves after they've had a very stressful event or critical incident. And go ahead and type them in the chat there. So PTSD type symptoms, certainly very similar. Critical incident stress is very common. PTSD is actually quite rare in terms of a true clinical diagnosis, thankfully. But a critical incident stress injury can linger and oftentimes feel quite intense and have some disruption in our lives for sure. Yep. Yeah, good. Isolation, pulling away from friends or family for sure. Nightmares, so having our sleep disturbed. It might also be where you have real strong fatigue afterwards in the coming days, a startle response, excellent, right? Where we might have some sort of event or perhaps a smell or something that will bring us back to the event that caused a critical incident. Using substances to deal with the problem, absolutely. Anger or avoidance, excellent. Good, so you folks recognize a number of the different types of stress responses. Some common ones that Greg and I see when we're asked to come in and support SARA members, and you'll probably recognize. Sleep is definitely one that gets impacted. Folks feeling fatigued, both physically but mentally as well. Having repetitive thoughts, really focusing kind of on what happened with the event. Some other ones, depending on the nature of the call, some strong emotions, particularly things like sadness or grief, or anger is another common one. So recognizing and normalizing these are really part of what our program does. And it's, I think it's part of the human experience just to recognize these are natural processes that our body goes through physiologically, psychologically, and emotionally. And having a way to manage those afterwards is really important for, especially for folks who are looking to be, for example, in the first responder world or as a search and rescue volunteer, where we know we use the expression, it's a matter of when, not if. So having that ability to recognize the impacts and then be able to bounce back from them is going to be really important. So you might wonder, yeah, go ahead, Greg.
No, just to add a little piece to this, because it's something that we see, and depending where you are and what kind of organization you're working with stuff, is also just the cumulative effects over time. So you can have a single critical incident that has one of those kinds of effects. If you're working in search and rescue, or you're working in any kind of a first responder thing, far more common amongst that group is the cumulative effect of one after another, after another, after another. And those can be quite difficult to deal with. And one thing I was thinking of, someone talked about the impact on family and friends. One of the sometimes it's those folks, it's your significant other, it's members of your family or your friends who start to notice these changes in you, even before you kind of really are aware of it yourself. Because if you get caught up in all this kind of mental pressures and various kinds of things, sometimes it's other folks who are going to say, "Hey, are you doing okay? Are you all right?" And that's where sometimes where the awareness comes up.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. So you might wonder, why would an organization like Search and Rescue want to build a CISM program, or any of the organizations that you folks belong to or represent? So I think it's important to have both a recognition in terms of the exposure to critical incidences and how frequently they actually happen, particularly in outdoor pursuits where we're talking backcountry or remote or wilderness settings. But also the flip side to it is the many benefits to having a robust CISM program to support folks after they've gone through a critical incident. Certainly in our organizations, we have seen much more reduction in folks quitting search and rescue or having those extended leaves because of the exposure to a critical incident. When I first joined my SAR group, they had done a body recovery following a death by suicide. Tragically, there was no supports back in those days, and within 6 months, half of the group had quit. And I say that because imagine the amount of energy and investment of perhaps money and time to have folks quit, to have half your organization leave and not have any supports for those folks, never mind the human cost, which I think is incalculable. So recognizing that we can do better is something that I think falls to each of us. Another aspect to our program is being peer-based. So what that means is Greg and I and the other CISM peers across the province, we are all first and foremost ground search and rescue members. And there's some real advantages to having a peer-based program compared to where you could hire and bring in an outside critical incident stress management person to work with your organization. Those can be effective. However, a peer-based program has some advantages to it that we have certainly found, and the GSAR community in BC has highlighted to us time and time again. You can recognize that when, excuse me, you've gone through a stressful event, you want to have that sense of feeling heard. And no better than to have someone who has gone through those types of experiences, who understands the lingo and language, and perhaps has even been there in very similar circumstances. The sense of empathy and the sense of being heard is profound. And that's one of the aspects that really ultimately in the intervention you want folks to feel. So having that similar experience is really valuable. And thanks, Greg. We're terrible for the lingo, acronyms like GSAR, which stands for Ground Search and Rescue. There are air search and rescue folks, and there's also marine search and rescue. So that's a distinguishing factor with our organization. All right, now, Greg, I don't have the numbers beside me here, so I'm not sure if this is still mine or if this is yours.
Well, that's details. I can certainly go over this one.
Sure.
So peer programs tend to all have certain things that you want to look at, that you want to pay some attention to. And you're looking at, some of it is all the questions that are going to be around the funding of programs, those types of things. The peer training is pretty well simple enough. The ICISF, which is the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation based in the States, is one of the certifying bodies that certifies people as interventionists. And there are a few others around. So do a little bit of research, see what's available out there, take a look at them. they're all doing much the same kind of thing. So it really decides what's going to work for you. What we've decided on is, because we are geographically scattered across British Columbia, that unlike any of your regular teams, you see each other on a somewhat regular basis. We only get to see each other face to face twice a year when we do these annual face to face training sessions. So we really accomplish two things at once. One is we're going to get some professional development, but also we're going to get a chance to build those relationships between us that are super important, so that when I get sent out of Vancouver to go up to Fort St. John, and one of my or two of my other peers fly in at the same time, we know each other. We understand each other. We know what our skills are, and so we can go and do an intervention in a much more seamless way. So it's been a very critical thing, those get-togethers, and we also have monthly Zoom calls to check in with each other. Sometimes that's training, sometimes that's updates on what's been going on. The other thing that we found to be super helpful is not just doing interventions, but doing things we call ENAs, education and awareness. So training sessions for the SAR teams across the province. And we have a setup for that. We'll talk a little more deeply about that in a bit. But we also have a number of promotional materials that we have. And if you haven't already, I would highly recommend that you check out the link with our team. So we have a public link as part of the Search and Rescue Association's website, but a public link with lots of resources, lots of ideas, copies of all of our handouts and various kinds of things. So it's very, again, our belief is the more widely we can spread this, the better it's going to be. And we have a number of different interventions. We'll also talk about that a little bit. Every time we do an intervention, the other side of that is sometimes we may want to do a follow-up. May want to do a follow-up with the whole team, may want to do a follow-up with certain individuals within the team. And so we have that capacity. So we just don't go in once and leave you. We're going to come back and have further conversations. And also we're relatively knowledgeable in, if further complications occur, where can we refer you to? It's kind of like any first aider would do. You know where their next level of care is. Well, we within our mental health world know where the next level of care is and how people can access that. So the why have a program, I think Chris covered a little bit of this, but just to give you a sense of who our quote audience is, there are 78 search and rescue teams in British Columbia. And in the 78 teams, there are essentially 3,400 volunteers. And it's those people who provide search and rescue within this province that we provide support for. They're dealing with anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 callouts annually. And that's everything from accidents in the backcountry to we live in a big urban city, so we actually deal with a lot of Alzheimer's walkaways, even in the urban environment. So there's a huge range of types of calls that go out there. Lots of calls end up, unfortunately, in body recoveries, either due to avalanche, swift water, or just with wilderness accidents and those types of things. As is noted there has been an increase over the last 15 to 20 years, and even more within the more recent years, of recoveries involving death by suicide. And there's also a lot of what are called near misses and injuries, because that's also a critical incident. If one of your teammates is injured on a call, that can be a critical incident. It can be quite stressful. And we have dealt with 4 volunteer fatalities in the last 30 years. And I think our CISM team's been involved in a couple of them. And the very first one that I mentioned that I was involved involved the death of a teammate on a training call was the very first CISM intervention that I was ever part of, and that was quite some number of years ago. So our program's been around since 2007, kind of organized ourselves our way sort of an operational arm and an administrative arm. The administrative side is our steering committee, which I am the chair of. And on that committee is our program coordinator who coordinates the operational side. I am the HR person as well, because that's my background in my professional life. We have a clinical director who's a clinical counselor. Because they're internally, it's really good to have people that you can go to talk through potential issues, or if you're dealing with some individuals or groups issues that you're seeing, and talk to a mental health professional, get some ideas and tips and so on. I have a training director, and we have an educational awareness committee chair, and we also have a dispatcher, because how do we know there are calls and how do we get out there? We have a whole dispatch function, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on as well. So right now we've got 32 peers, which now include 8 new members in training. We had a 5-day training just this last week before last, which is longer than our usual training. But when we have new members, they need to go through 4 days of training and then sort of a half day kind of organizational stuff. So whenever we bring in new members, that's what we do. And they have anywhere between 2 years up to 40 plus years of SARA experience. And I mentioned earlier that paying for things is important. We have to travel around the province. We have to, so if we're looking at plane flights, driving cars costs, and all those kinds of staying in hotels. So on the administrative side, when we're doing education awareness programs, or we ourselves are traveling for training and so on, we get funding from the Search and Rescue Association. We get 55 grand a year towards that. So that's how we can move our 32 people around and take care of the care and feeding and all those good things. Operationally, when there is an intervention, or we need to go meet with a SAR team, following up on a call that they've had, that's covered across the province, and that's paid for by the province. So what that group is called EMCR, which is the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, part of the provincial government. And so they, on those operational calls, pay all costs related that way. So between those two bodies, that covers off everything that we need. And luckily for us, means that we don't have to do a whole lot of fundraising, which I know a lot of other groups and teams might have to do.
Thanks, Greg. So another, actually, I think this is continuing with yours, isn't it?
Yeah, just the last one. I think I've just covered a little bit of this. The training we do is through the Critical Incident Stress Foundation, in both what's called individual, so we can work one-on-one, or dealing with groups in crisis. Mentioned that little training and why we do it. We also do other types, more advanced training, or as needed, we can bring in various folks who can give us more background on suicide, more background on dealing with mental health issues, and any one of a number of things. So it's all we like to get as much training as we can to provide everyone with the tools they need to get things done. So just so if again, this is something if you're thinking of getting into a peer-based program, what we generally are looking for is people who will be accepted as peers by the groups we're working with. So for us, that means they need to be fully trained as a ground search and rescue person. They have a minimum of 1 year, but really we're looking for 2 years of at least active training. So they've had a range of experiences in search and rescue. And we look at geography as well, because trying to get to the southeast corner of the province, if you have to get up to the northwest corner, that's a long way, and it could be quite difficult. And so we want to try and put people around the province as much as possible. You'll see some maps a little later on where we're going to get a sense of where everybody is. So we do interviews and references and all of those kinds of things to bring them in. It's extensive, but we found really paying attention to not only the experience fit, but the relational fit. That our team members are going to really work well with each other is super important. And just as a little note there, one of the things we say is we don't want any of our members to try to provide interventions to their own groups, which really makes some kind of sense, because they already have personal relationships with people. It's hard not to be impacted by something that your own teammates are obviously impacted by. So it gives us a little more space and a little more objectivity to bring folks in from outside the team to provide those interventions.
And just further to that as well a bit, you could imagine if Greg had just sent me out a search manager to search a swamp, and I'm less than enthusiastic about the time I slogged through that wetland to have it covered, that we do not want to have those kinds of relationships spill into the mental health supports that we are trying to provide for our SARA members. So we have found that to be a best practice within our organization. And it ultimately leads to the folks who need support feeling like they are getting the best service that is possible out there. So that's one thing that we have found with our program.
Yep. And the last little piece on the peers is they're on a 1 year probation. So they will make sure that they get out on different calls, get a chance to go on education awareness sessions. They get a chance to see the various types of the things on the program, and sort of to build their skills. And again, that we find that I think this is just generally, as long as we've done a good intake, we almost every time we take everybody on into as full members after the year.
And I think it's important for any group that's looking at creating their own peer-based program, it is worth the time and energy upfront to recruit very carefully and have that selection process being very robust, so that you are investing in those folks early on. It's not a cheap process, or we'll go over a bit of that a little bit later on. But you do want to make sure that you're not taking the approach that when I first joined search and rescue, it was, are you a warm body? Do you have a pulse? Okay, you're in. That is not the approach that we would advocate, even though sometimes I know organizations struggle to fill roles and seats. This will serve your organization best to take that time up front. Okay, so having that program structure is one aspect that we wanted to talk about. The second one is the promotion and the education and awareness aspect to a program that we have found has really grown, especially over the 10 years that I have been involved with it. Really trying to get the GSAR members, when they come in, a sense of being inoculated or vaccinated against critical incidents, so that they have that awareness before they go out on their very first tough call, but then also to build in some ability to bounce back after the tough calls as well. And having something that is going to be meaningful for the GSAR community, whether they're a brand new member or they've been a vet in the trenches for 10, 15, 30 years, you want to have them feel like this aspect of your program is something that's worth their time and attention. So we'll unpackage a bit of what we do here. First of all, we do try to make sure that we target groups regularly. By that, we mean at least once every 3 years. The pandemic was a bit of a challenge, but it actually opened up the gate for Zoom to become a platform for us to be able to do these presentations. We have 4 presentations in total. 3 of them are PowerPoints. One is a movie that we had made with some funding that we were able to save while we were not training face-to-face. And having a variety of presentations, particularly when it's the down season, really has captivated the GSAR community across BC. And many groups now have it as part of their training plan that annually they'll have one of the presentations and our folks come in and present it either by Zoom or in person. So plant the seed there before they go out into the field. What's the psychological PPE that you're putting your folks are putting on for your folks? You know, if you're a backcountry guide, you've given them maybe a first aid kit and some training to deal with some different physical issues. But when you actually have somebody who's in distress and they're going to have to help with that situation, what kind of psychological PPE have you prepared for them? I would encourage folks to do that, because what we have found, search and rescue members, and I'm going to hazard a guess, all of you and all of the folks you work with have the same kind of mindset. You like to be prepared. You like to feel confident. You like to feel like what you're asked to do is within the scope and realm of what you have the skills to do. What many times we find really challenging for folks is when they're asked to do something outside of what they're trained or equipped for, and that overwhelm can be incredibly distressing for folks. So thinking about what you might be asking folks to go into, even if it is a 1 in 100 or 1 in 50 incidents, is going to be really valuable to prepare them before they have to face those instances. The 4 presentations there, you can see them listed there. The first one we really focus on is getting those brand new members before they go out on their tough SAR calls. I can tell you with my SAR group, we had one instance. We fortunately did the presentation in January. In March, we tragically had a critical incident, snowmobile accident, where one person was critically injured and another person died. And it was really telling for our SAR members in my group to be able to see what they had just been trained in, that matter of when, not if, and some of the changes that they were going to experience and some of the effective strategies to manage those stresses. It was incredibly powerful for them to recognize how quickly they were putting those skills to use. So you have no idea when it's going to come, but you want folks to be prepared. Okay. Another aspect to it is looking at that resiliency. It has become quite a common word in all kinds of communities in the last 10 to 15 years, especially in British Columbia with the wildfire situation, not just talking about individuals, but community resilience, the ability to bounce back. And I really want to highlight that is an important foundation for effective long-serving members in any organization. We also have a series of videos that we made on our YouTube channel. They are available there. If you go to the website, I put in the chat, bcsara.com/CISM. There is a link to our YouTube channel, and you can see these 4 videos there that are free use for anybody who'd like to have them. One of the ones I'd like to highlight is the SAR is a family affair concept. And that is when somebody joins an organization, it's not just you, it's actually your support network as well. That might be a spouse, it might be a parent, it might be a best friend, even your children if you have them. All of those actually sign up for the search and rescue experience, because after a tough call, like Greg said, they're going to notice that there's been some changes going on, and they want to be able to support you best. So we found these videos to be very effective to prompt different conversations, both for the SAR community, but also for the support network as well. So I encourage you to check those out if you're so inclined.
Yeah, just while you're changing over, it's one of the concepts that we've introduced that I think has had a lot of positive impact, is reminding our members, and they think about reminding your own teammates and so on, to have conversations with their significant other about what you do. We call it like a little contract. But if you've had a tough call, what kind of support they want to know how to support you. Because you could talk about, well, I might want someone to talk to, but I won't tell you all the details. Or but those kinds of conversations really help sort of build that network around you, so they know how best to approach you, when to approach you, and that type of thing.
Yeah, excellent. So we have found not only then do we want the GSAR members or the folks of your organization in some of these presentations, we want their support network folks as well. A nice caveat to bring in the people is to maybe host a dinner so that there's that incentive to come in. We find those get really well attended. And then many times it's a conversation during the presentations between those support folks and the SAR member, or if it's an employee of your organization or a guide or tree planter or any of those, so that there is an awareness that's happening, but also an ongoing dialogue, like Greg said, of how can we support each other? What are some of those possible changes? In search and rescue, one of the other aspects we talk about is, are there no-goes? Is it weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, right? All those different things that you might want to be considerate of before the pager goes off on that day, and you're considering walking out the door, and your support person is kind of looking at you going like, really? You're going to miss this? Not the best time for that to happen. Some other times that we find folks really like to have a CISM presentation is after a significant incident. The penny really drops after they've seen it for themselves, either in themselves or in their teammates. And so that's kind of when the iron is hot. We like to get in there and make sure that the education side is promoted there. Another thing we're very fortunate in British Columbia is to have quite a robust set of conferences and webinars, and we try to make sure that our CISM program is there with new information or new perspectives or new discussion topics for the GSAR community, so that the concept of mental health and wellness is always being promoted in different ways. Many times we find the themes of the past season really resonate. This past year, wildfire season was really pronounced, and there were a number of SAR groups involved with delivering evacuation notice deliveries. And so having a conversation about some of the stressors that they might have experienced, and again, some best practices to manage your stresses afterwards, is really timely. And then in British Columbia, to be a search and rescue member, there's a number of courses. We try to make sure that in those certification courses, the manuals reference CISM, or during the instruction, the instructors reference that as well. And then we also do have a hashtag that we like to use and a social media presence on our Facebook and Twitter feed, CISM Saturday. If you search for it, it has just some little poignant, timely comments to make for the search and rescue community or anyone who's out there to be healthy and proactive in their wellness. All right, back to you, Greg.
All right, thanks, Chris. So the actual interventions. So we get called in, and we, as part of the first call, is to try and determine what it is, what are we going to do? Because we have a number of tools in the intervention toolkit. So it's, as we've mentioned before, we've got interventions, we've got that, but we have this whole other background of things that go around supporting that, whether that's the education programs, whether it's the promotional stuff, and so on. And first of all, is it one person is impacted, or is it a number of people that are impacted? Is it the whole team, or is it a subset of the team? And all of those are conversations that are had with the usually the search manager, or the person who had organized, or the person making the call. So we have our main interventions is what's called a group critical incident stress debrief. It does have 7 steps. It had been designed, it's been used for a number of years through the Critical Incident Stress Foundation. This is something that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the number of people. And this is sort of the in-depth intervention. It's usually for situations that have been quite difficult. And we take the people sort of walk through these steps in ways that help them both deal with, learn, and deal with and learn with the situation as for themselves, but also learn about the actual call. So learning things is good. Compared to, say, a diffusing. So a debrief happens 2 to 3 days after a call. a defusing happens immediately after a call, and it's much shorter. It's probably less than an hour, and it's really right at the end of a call where the people who were involved get a chance to have a bit of a debrief, a bit of a conversation about what happened. You're talking about initial impacts, but it's also a little bit of a teaching in there about things to watch out for, things to be concerned about. And what tends to happen is because we're geographically separated, it's difficult for us to get there to do a lot of diffusings, but it can happen. But if you do a diffusing, now you know what you have is a marvelous kind of opportunity to look into the situation and see, now, should we follow this up with a longer, more in-depth debriefing? So some kit can be standalone, or it may be a lead into the longer debriefing. The other one is the obvious one that I mentioned, is just a single individual one-on-one. Or we might hold a number of one-on-ones. And all of this, the design that goes into these is all set up at the very beginning with conversations with the appropriate folks at the team. So we've had situations where we have 2 or 3 one-on-ones, and we have a group debriefing as well, or any combination we might even think of. And the last one is one that we really evolved to since we started. On-scene support is when we have calls that are the multi-day calls. We've had search and rescue calls go up for as long as a week. I think as long as 10 days, searching for people who are lost, and for those of you who've maybe been involved in things like this, you'll know that there's one of the critical type incidents is even just the decision to stop searching, even though you haven't found the person. And in smaller communities, that can mean, you're no longer searching for somebody that you know or you have a connection to. And it's very helpful for members of our team just to be around usually it's about after day 2 or day 3, just to be there, greet people when they're coming back in and out of the field, seeing how people are doing, being part of the overall overhead team conversations to remind people that we're there. So you can do one-on-ones, but it's also just being an active support. Super helpful, we're finding. And as you can see, over the years, since 2012, there, on the left-hand side up to 2022, so over the last 10 years, it really doubled our call volume. So being just under 30 now to being just over 60. And there's 2 things that happen there. And you would also notice this is as we do calls and our more and more of the teams get to know us, they're more likely to call us in on for a second intervention. And so some is becoming known, some is coming through the education awareness stuff, and some is just coming because there is an increased volume of overall number of SARA calls in British Columbia.
And I'll just add as well, I think there's also a societal increase in awareness in mental health. Presentations like this, and people being much more comfortable saying, I struggled with some stress or some anxiety or whatever after an incident or in general. And that overall awareness and willingness to have the conversation about mental health, I think, is another aspect that societally we are seeing generate some more discussion. I particularly see when new SAR members come in, especially the younger folks, and hats off to you. There is a desire to say, like, what are the mental health supports available for me if I'm going to go out and deal with a tough call? And I think that's absolutely amazing. Asking for those supports before they're needed and having the awareness is absolutely vital. So those changes collectively, I think, is something that it has generated more support being requested, and thankfully our group is able to provide those.
Great. And so the actual calls, remember I said that we have a dispatch thing. So that's the map there. So you can see each one of those little colored dots there is but of the SAR teams within the province, you can see there's mostly the biggest number are in the southern part of the province and get a little more scattered as we get up north. But so we have a system within BC for like search and rescue calls. All search and rescue calls go through a 24 hour a day, 7 day a week coordination center that anyone like RCMP, the police, ambulance, fire can call for our services by going to that coordination center, and then they call out the appropriate resources. And in addition, now added to that is anyone on a SAR team or a search manager or anyone who's connected with search and rescue can call them as well and ask to initiate the CISM team. And once we decide what's going to happen, we send minimum of 2, sometimes 3 of our members that will go there. They will have met beforehand to determine what the call was, what kinds of things we might be facing. We'll have chosen whatever the intervention tools to use would be. And I guess one of the other things that is just I'm going to add on to this, I've mentioned there's always follow-up with individuals from the SAR team, but there's also follow-up within our own group. And because sometimes hearing the stories of really difficult calls, here being in the room when there's lots of emotion and so on, our own members may need support as well. So we're also looking at that as a follow-up to make sure that that we're all feeling okay, that we're supporting each other. One thing I should go way back and just sort of one thing that can make a critical incident more critical is if you have in some ways have a relationship or relate to what's happening. So if this is an issue involving the death of a 10-year-old child, if you have a 10-year-old child, that's going to hit you more. And those types of things. So those kind of unpredictable connections are something we want to make sure we're going to support within our own team and going to check those kinds of things out. And let's see. Oh, this is you get to talk about what's learned here, Chris. Yep, you got to
Need to unmute myself.
Yeah,
you can imagine after 16, 17 years of CISM services, as well as having a program that really champions professional development, networking with other CISM programs, and having an awareness of mental health, that there would be some lessons learned and some wise practices that we've captured. And I think it's important for any organization that's looking at starting off to try to find a way to leverage those learnings so that you are providing the best services possible for the intended audience as fast as possible, rather than spending time learning different things. So early on, our call volume was definitely not in the 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 range. Our founder of the program, I believe, said that in the first 2 years, it was under 5 calls, and there might have even been a year where there were no calls. The search and rescue call volume has certainly increased over time, and as Greg mentioned, that increased call volume has also generated more CISM calls. But taking some time to educate the community or the folks that you're trying to support is going to be well worth your time. Having a strong presence with that education and awareness aspect, that really is where the discussion and the penny drop instances happen, so that folks get a really good understanding of what CISM can provide and the instances where they need those supports. Make sure that you have kind of a bottom-up approach as well, where the folks who are going to be benefiting from it are involved in the discussion of the creation of a program, if that's something that you're looking at. One of the things that we have looked at is how we can support volunteers in a broader sense of wellness and not just in critical incidences. We have really kind of worked inside of a box in terms of supports, because we do have funders that are responsible with public funds, and we want to make sure that we're honoring the intentions of the program. We're also hitting a place in our organization where at 70 calls in a year, what is the capacity for our members as volunteers to be able to support the requests that come in? And so that's something that every organization needs to be mindful of. But fundamentally, we do get requests that are, in essence, very similar to like an EFAP or Employee and Family Assistance Program, and looking for some sort of support for maybe it's interpersonal conflict or marital relations or personal stress management or anxiety or those sorts of things. So having some thought in terms of providing a very robust support system outside of just the critical instances is probably in your organization and your members' best interests. Another thing that we have found is that with a GSAR response, there are others involved in the periphery. For example, the helicopter pilot, there might have been a body recovery from an avalanche, and that body is transported by helicopter to another location. That pilot might also be really struggling with the experience that they've gone through as well. You can imagine if you're dealing with some employees, and maybe there were some bystanders or some clients involved in the incident as well. Thinking about how you can support those folks is really, really valuable. What we have found is the GSAR community is a very compassionate and empathetic group of folks. And when they see somebody on the periphery involved in an incident, they want to make sure that they're taken care of. So having some thought to that is going to be really valuable. Our program is also fortunate to provide grief supports when a SAR group has lost a member. And that's not just line of duty deaths. It could also be, for example, where, as an example, we had a SAR member die recreationally. They were recovered by search and rescue. And so that SAR group had kind of the double hat of dealing with the body recovery, but also the recovery of one of their own. So being able to provide those supports is important. And then also looking at mental health supports outside of what the program provides. Support for historical incidents, especially when you're starting off with a new program. Folks will say, oh yeah, this is really, I wish this had been around X years ago when we had this incident. And you might recognize that already, just going, oh, I wish we'd had some sort of supports when something had happened in the past. In our program, that is an advanced intervention, but having some awareness and some thought to supporting folks for historical incidences is going to be valuable, because folks carry some really heavy experiences that they were not able to process or deal with back in the day. It still oftentimes comes up to the surface during the present, and being able to help them adjust to that or have it put into a context where it's filed away. It's one of the analogies we like to use is it's in the filing cabinet, the door is closed. You can open it up and recall the memory, but that drawer is not constantly opening and rattling around and impacting regular functioning as well. So, and then as Greg mentioned, we want to take care of our peers after they've gone out and supported the SAR members out in the field there. So taking care of our members as well is a really important aspect to it. Our education awareness program is not just about the presentations. We also like to have posters in the SAR halls to keep that visual presence. We have pamphlets with best practices that we share out at interventions or education sessions. We have fridge magnets with the phone number that SAR members can use to access the program, so it prompts a discussion in the house. All these different aspects really help build a robust program. Some other things that you want to be thoughtful of in terms of your membership as CISM peers is to have some good, clear conversation about expectations of what it means to be a peer, what your attendance requirements are going to be, because GSAR in BC is a very significant undertaking of time and energy commitments already. When you become a CISM peer, that extra additional time going away on training events, like we just came back from, or going away on interventions is above and beyond their GSAR commitment. So if you are looking at creating a program for your organization, you want to be able to have a clear expectation painted for folks coming in. One of the advantages we have in our program is having folks with a mental health background. That can be advantageous for a number of reasons. But you also want to make sure that they understand that they are limited to a scope and scale of practice that is not psychotherapy. It is not mental health services. We are not replacing that by any stretch. This is a critical incident intervention. And so having those folks who are skilled, in those extra awareness practices are also part of the GSAR community and are there to be able to provide some wisdom from their perspective when you've got a tricky or challenging, or as I like to call them, crunchy call to work with, is really valuable for an organization's depth to the bench. We service all of British Columbia. So we, as Greg mentioned, our peers are found across the province, situated geographically and chosen strategically when we do have recruitments. And that is useful for a variety of reasons. It's something that I would encourage any organization to consider. And then here's some of the posters, the fridge magnet that we have there, some pictures from presentations we've done with other organizations or conferences. Or then we also like to make sure our education awareness sessions are hands-on, so folks are getting up out of their chair and dialoguing and participating. Folks really do like to share their stories and talk about their experiences, so we really try to promote that in our education and awareness presentations. So we thought we'd throw out some discussion questions for your organizations out there to consider. And again, this is if you're looking to build a program, here's some thoughtful questions for your organization to entertain and consider. We're fortunate to have a pot of money to pay for the training and the expenses so that our members are not out of pocket. That's something that your organization will want to consider when you're looking at providing services for the folks that you work with. Another one is how would they request the service? Who's the contact person? So these kinds of questions I think are really important for an organization to start off with right from the get-go, so that you have a thoughtful, robust, complete approach to building a program that's going to service the needs of your folks that you're working with, but also not tax those who are signing up to volunteer. So as mentioned, our program is peer-based. You could look at a non-peer-based organization. Greg, remind me, have you worked with like provided services for other organizations as a non-peer in terms of providing critical incident stress interventions?
I have not, no.
Oh, okay. And I have for a couple of organizations where I'm not part of their entity, like for example, a healthcare organization where they dealt with a traumatic death. So those sorts of times, having somebody come in from the outside is a possibility as well. Looking at where you're going to get the best buy-in and the best value for the folks that you're servicing, I think is one thing that I would really highlight. If you're starting a program, as mentioned, Greg, in his early part of the presentation, we have a number of folks who fill different roles in terms of administering our program. We found that that has evolved over time. When I first joined, we had one person starting the program and coordinating it. It is now 7, I think, on the steering committee calls. And spreading that workload and getting a wider perspective of input when you're trying to make program administrative decisions, I think is in your organization's best interest. So I would highlight that. And then the ICSF instructors that are out there, they do have a cost for the course. You can see that listed there. So if you are looking at creating peers, that would be something to be mindful of. It's not cheap, but you also get world-class, outstanding instruction. You get a manual, you get tons of practice. And ultimately, every course that I've ever taken with the ICSF, I have really rave reviews in terms of the content and the instructors that we've been able to work with. So just a little bit about BC SARA. We were fortunate to put together a year in review. It is available on our website, bcsara.com. If you'd like to get a better sense of the GSAR community, what they've done, this is our first one, and so we actually went and did a bunch of historical investigation in terms of the roots of GSAR and how many of the groups got their very first foundations in their community. Some of the groups in British Columbia are older than 50 years, so that's a real testament to the volunteers and the service that they provide to their communities. Back in the early 1990s, 1991, the call volume was 400 search and rescue calls a year. We're now close to 2,000 as an average. We've grown really into things like evacuation notice deliveries with the civil emergencies that BC has struggled through over the past decade. So if you're interested, do take a look at the year in review. It's a real testament to the fine folks who service British Columbia and all of our visitors here, doing so many incredible rescues and call-outs. And then our program is highlighted there in that as well. You can see some of the folks that are in our organization. It talks about the 3 main areas that we feel are really important for any organization to be aware of and mindful of. We're fortunate to have probably one of the largest peer-based volunteer CISM programs, not only in Canada, but in North America. And I'm proud to belong to such an incredible group of folks who regularly give of themselves to service the needs of the GSAR community that's out there. I think we're in the home stretch here, Greg. Anything to add?
Yeah, well, just a few things, because we want to be able to open the floor up for quick questions for the last part and things. But just to say, because I think one of the, remember I said, this kind of growth within the whole public understanding of critical incident stress and about programs and things, that I know within BC, there are a number of community-based CISM programs in some of the communities across the province. There is the heli ski operations just set up, is now into their 2nd year of providing a CISM program for staff and people who are involved with either as backcountry guides or working in various heli ski operations across the province. We've just partnered with the Royal Canadian Marine Search and Rescue, because Chris and I and our group are all land-based, but there's also a Marine Search and Rescue group that operates in BC, and they are in the process of setting up a critical incident stress team. And at the federal level, there is also, it's called the Humanitarian Aid Program. It's a joint venture funded through the federal government, but it's being managed by the Red Cross, a Salvation Army, and a group called SARVAC, the Search and Rescue Volunteer Association, will be in the process of setting up a critical incident stress program for people who get involved in humanitarian aid across the country. So it's definitely a thing, an area that's seeing a lot of growth, and a lot of groups are setting them up. So hopefully some of you will also be part of that as well.
Cool. Well, and that brings us to our final slide here. So thank you so much for joining us. We're happy to stick around and answer any questions. If you'd like to type them in the chat, we'll moderate that. Or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask if you have a microphone, I'm happy to do that as well. Our contact information is also on the screen there, so feel free to reach out. And as mentioned, we have a website there under the British Columbia Search and Rescue's banner. And has a number of resources, as well as those 4 videos on our YouTube channel that are mentioned. So feel free to access those, or use it to promote mental health in any of the organizations or communities that you belong to.
Just look at the question. Oh, someone, Dave was wondering about the CISM manual that we have being available to the public. It's not on the website, I don't think. But also it's right. Yeah, unfortunately, it's over 100 pages long right now, so it's kind of a piece. But what we would do, and then we're quite happy to do, is if anyone's setting up a program, if they wanted to contact us and have a look at that, or at least get some directions and pointers in that, we can happily help out.
Yeah, that would be the program. So there is a certification manual when you become a CISM peer, but what Greg's referring to is our program has its own manual in terms of kind of best practices and procedures, etc. And we're happy to share that with any organization if they'd find it useful to start off.
Right. And if you want, we didn't have any of the links here, but if you want to know about the actual training of for CISM intervention folks, that would definitely check out the website for the ICISF, the Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and take a look and see if there's others around in your various areas that may also be providing certification, so you can compare.
Great. I see there's a question. Are there any other similar type programs or trainings you know that you would recommend, for instance, through the Justice Institute of BC or other? Certainly, the Justice Institute does have a CISM training program. Greg, have you taken any of their courses?
Um, my very first training in CISM was through the Justice Institute. But that was, that'd be like almost 20 years ago now. So I haven't. I know they still offer it, but my time is a little out of date, I'd say.
Yeah, and I've only taken it through the ICSF, so I'm not familiar with what the differences in curriculum or certifications would be, but certainly encourage organizations or folks who are looking to get certification to find what is going to be considered an industry standard. Our program went with the ICSF because our founder, he actually created the CISM program for the Ministry of Forests at the time in British Columbia, and that's the program that they trained under. And talking to other organizations like paramedics, they use the ICSF as well as their training and certification body. So that's where the ground search and rescue community started off with. Yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing that there, Dave. In the link there, you'll see the JIBC's Critical Incident Stress Management Program and some information there. Any other questions out there, folks? Yeah, good question. So are we connected with victim services at all? Greg, what's been your experience with that aspect of support?
Well, I think, yeah, I was kind of expecting someone to would at least ask something around this. So if you think about what we're doing, what we've got here is we have a service for the SAR members. And sometimes people are saying, well, what about the people we were searching for? What about the family members? What about the people who are impacted by these critical incidents, but they're not in our audience per se? So one of the things we have in BC for any call that's involved where there's an initiation or connection through to the policing services is in many places they have what's called a victim services. So that's a community-based program for people who've been, it's really there for any victims of any type of crime or whatever, but they're also there to provide services for folks, for these individuals who are impacted and maybe have experienced critical incident stress. So they don't run interventions per se, but by and large, they have connections to people with counseling or counseling backgrounds and can be supportive and can also make referral connections or tell people where to go to get that kind of support. On my actual rescue calls, what I've been involved in is where victim services is on scene dealing with the family who's waiting for us to go find their son. And the CISMs are, our CISM services are there to support the SARA members. So we can kind of, we've sort of looking after slightly different audiences, but all part of the same call.
And in British Columbia, I find generally that's a police the local police detachment is the one who has the victim services folks. Right. And so again, like Greg said, they're there to support those who are in crisis because it's their loved one that's missing or their loved one is injured rather than the SAR members. But we do find that we work closely with them at different times to make sure that there are supports. Because you can imagine, like Greg said, right, somebody's son is missing. That has to be probably the worst day of their life. And to be able to make sure that they're getting supported is absolutely vital. Our program is there for the SAR members, but we do certainly advocate that then the RCMP bring in their victim services trained folks so that that family is being supported.
And I would also add, there is another group that's, they're relatively new. They started out being working mostly out of in the Rockies, but they have just recently opened part of the program up in Squamish, but it's called Mountain Muskox. And they are running group-based programs for, again, for anyone who's been impacted through accidents. Like almost everyone involved there has had critical incidents, when you say problems with but connected with the backcountry. So they're all people there again, guides, team group leaders, track leaders, various kinds of things, first aiders, and they've just like I say, a couple of years that they've been in operation. I think they may have done a presentation with this group that you're here. That maybe you could check that out. But anyway, they're also, I think they're a really good resource to know about.
Anything else?
Yeah, gentlemen, I have a question from Day, who's in and out through her power outage. She was wondering to the group, are there any other folks here who work with an organization that has any kind of similar critical incident response program, or any other ideas for organizations that have set up, that have been set up already, or have found that folks have found helpful? Is there anyone working in any of those areas already?
Good question. Or is there anyone out there who is considering building a CISM program for their organization or their clients or folks that they work with? As Greg mentioned, we're currently working with RCM SARA, which is the volunteer Coast Guard members across British Columbia. And it's been really exciting to have a conversation with them and some of the experiences they've had in the past, but also recognizing that their membership does really need that support when they've had a tough call, for sure. So, yeah. Thanks, Dave, for that YouTube video there. I'm not sure.
I think that, that's probably the one for the presentation on mountain muskox that was previously done. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, excellent.
So any last thoughts, observations, comments, or suggestions?
Well, thank you, Courtney, for your kind words. Glad it was useful for you, and looking forward to hearing of any organization successes in creating a mental health support program for their folks. Greg, you're going to say?
Just read this. Yes, I think they like it. It's as I keep saying, it's kind of an area that's more and more interest, more and more growth in, and I think that everyone that I know that's involved in any form of support around critical incidents and around mental health issues in the backcountry is one that we like to support each other in any way that we can, and also like to know about them. So yeah, do feel free to either ask questions or send us links or any of that kind of thing.
Maybe as questions are dwindling a little, feel free to type in the chat if any questions come up. But maybe before everyone sneaks away, a big thank you to you, Greg and Chris, for sharing so much of the pretty incredible work in the system that's set up for our search and rescue teams in BC to support. And yeah, really inspiring work and really important work, and it's great to hear about what's happening and then how folks can start to build their own programs, so that I think one of the notes I saw on your pamphlet was that not all injuries are visible, remembering that we're taking a lot home with us when we are dealing with incidents in the field. So thanks for the work you do and for sharing it all here. Day also says to the group to keep in touch and let us know if we can be a support, or if you have any ideas, if anyone here has any ideas for future guests or speakers, or even specialized trainings that we can put on and share with the community here. But again, a really big thank you for your time and for everything you shared here. Really interesting to hear about.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thanks for the interest and opportunity to talk about something we're very passionate about.
For sure. If folks want to stay around and ask questions for Chris or Greg or myself or Day, feel free to stay. But you're welcome to sign off and return to your evening and your self-care routines, hopefully.
Absolutely. We'll stop sharing there.
Hey there, Greg and Chris.
Hey.
Just want to
Hey,
say
Donna.
hi. And,
Hi, Donna.
and I'm looking at the number of calls that you got. Holy, you guys are busy.
Yes, it's yep, it's good. It's the let's say good news, bad news. Yeah.
But no, it's good news that people are asking for help and you're delivering. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
The bad news always happens.
True enough.
Yeah.
True enough.
Yeah. Well, nice to hear you too.
Thanks.
Nice
Good
to see you too. Yeah.
Thank you. All the best, and I'll say goodnight too.
Okay.
Care.
Thanks, Donna.